Hello, and welcome to the Trombone Corner podcast, where we feature interviews with trombonists from all over the globe. It's great to have you join us as we talk all things trombone, brought to you by the Brass Arc and Bob Reeves Brass. This is your host, John Snell from Bob Reeves Brass, along with some help from my good buddy Noah Gladstone of the Brass Arc. Noah, how you doing?
Howdy, John.
Looking forward to having another episode of the Trombone Corner?
Yeah, exciting. It's been a couple weeks since we did our last one, and excited to jump back into it.
We have a very exciting guest today, Nick Daley, buddy of yours, right?
Yeah, dear friend. We went to college together. I really love performing with him all the time. Wanted to have him on the podcast for a while, and he's super thoughtful and insightful and has some great stories. So excited to bring this interview with all of you.
And a great radio voice.
He does have he is very handsome too.
Oh, man. Well, we'll get to Nick's interview here in a moment after a word from our sponsor and some trombone news.
Hello, loyal listeners. This is Noah Gladstone. I founded the Brass Arc in 2010 to celebrate the love and passion for legendary brass craftsmanship. I wanted to share my joy for the best gear and bring it to the forefront of musicians' minds through the development and cultivation of modern equipment, with roots firmly established in the classic designs of the vintage masters. Bob Reeves Brass is a world-renowned mouthpiece maker of the highest quality and has been handcrafting mouthpieces for professional trumpet players for over 50 years. Together, we are excited to bring a premium line of handcrafted mouthpieces to the trombone community, inspired by rare and vintage classics and modernized for the needs of today's musician. Models are available in a variety of sizes, from small and large tenor, bass, trombone, euphonium, as well as custom sizes. We also have artist models available, as used by Jay Friedman and Charlie Vernon. Visit brassarc.com or trombonemouthpiece.com for more information, and remember to follow us on Instagram at the Brass Arc and at Bob Reeves Brass. Back to you, John.
So Noah, you got a lot going on at the shop, more than usual. Tell us about it.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we just finished our move to our new space. It was a lot. I cannot believe how much stuff we had in that tiny space. Brad Close and I were sharing about 415 square feet at our old shop for all of our friends that have visited. And 10 years of things really kind of adds up. And it was an epic move. I can't believe how many heavy machines Brad has, and how many trombones I have in the shop. It's nuts. So thanks to my friends, Matt Otto, Chikasa Marita, Spencer Schaefer, and of course Brad and myself, and Ryan Dragon, who all showed up and helped us move to the new space, which is just a couple blocks down the street, and very exciting. It's about 4 times the size. I have a dedicated shipping department. Finally, we have a showroom. Brad's got a full space to do his work for his custom trombones and parts and repairs. So really, really nice. Still appointment only, but definitely please drop me an email if you want to pop by and see all the cool things that we have. Also have some other announcements. Obviously, I'm getting a new shipment of Stevens trombones pretty soon from Steve Shires. Very excited about that. I'll have a few new M&W trombones coming in. And finally, I can announce that I've been working with Miles O'Malley in Chicago, along with Jay Friedman, and we're going to launch a full line of trombones, 100% made in Chicago, designed by Jay, and some input from myself and Miles and his team. And those will be exclusively at the Brass Arc, and I'll be opening pre-orders for that pretty soon. So watch the space for some really exciting stuff. I also have another project coming in fruition with my colleague Don Sade. We've been doing the updated Bach and Conn trombones for a couple of years now. A lot of people play those. Tim Higgins has one. A lot of other people. We're going to be launching a project together soon as well. So some exciting times at the Brass Arc. Definitely watch the website and the social medias for some really cool new products.
Yeah, congratulations, Noah. That new space is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Couple things going on. Well, first of all, and this involves both of us, we'll be at the International Trombone Festival coming up the end of May. May 29th to June 1st are the exact dates. This year's festival is going to be at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. So Robert Coomber and Spencer Schaefer, our trombone staff here at the shop, will be there representing the Bob Reeves Brass Arc trombone line of mouthpieces. We'll have all kinds of fun models there available for tenor, bass trombone, and we'll bring the alto mouthpiece this time.
Very
that we forgot last year at
Very
ITF
good.
that everyone asked for. So
the other thing, John, we should mention is we're going to do a limited run of bronze mouthpieces.
That's right.
Hopefully pretty soon for our trombone friends. It'll just be a limited number. I think we'll probably do 50 pieces total, something like that. So gonna post some information about that pretty soon. Brett and I and John are going to work on some prototypes the next couple weeks.
Yeah. We're also making a pretty cool solid sterling silver trombone mouthpiece for an artist. Noah, you got the first one that we made during the pandemic. And we've done some trumpet ones since then, but this will be the first trombone one we've made in a while. And we're making a video on that. So check that out. That's a really cool piece we're making. And then also we just got a shipment of Ulven mutes from Sweden. So those just came in. We got some of the Christian Lindbergh straight and wah-wah mutes.
I got to come by and try those out.
Yeah, they're awesome. Besides looking cool with that neat chili red color that Lhasa puts on those. But they sound great, and they sell. A lot of players are picking those up. So those just came in. We're getting a huge shipment of guard bags. That includes a bunch of trombone cases. So if you're in the market for a trombone case, those are coming in mid-May. And what else? We got another shipment of Yupon mutes as well that just came in. So because who needs how many people need a bass trombone solo tone mute? But if you do need one, the Yupon is the best to play.
It is.
It's not cheap,
without question, the best.
Yeah,
sure.
So we got a couple more of those in, and for a bass trombone solo tone, they're in relatively high demand. So those are all on our website, and I hope you'll check them out. And if you're at ITF, you'll be able to check all of them out in person because we'll have them there.
You also have a small selection of Shire's trombones at the shop too, right?
Well, growing. Yeah, we have almost all of the Q series, and I think we have 5 or 6 of the custom series. We just got a George Curran bass come in. That's probably not going to last very long. We've had a number of people.
I'm surprised Robert Coomber hasn't absconded with that yet.
Well, funny story. He actually was cleaning out his house and found a slide, and basically he could put a whole nother bass trombone together with parts he had lying around that he didn't know he had. So that Curran is still up for sale. We got a New York in. We have a Michael Davis Plus. So some pretty cool horns. A lot less than we had a few months ago when we first got our shipment, but again, real proud to carry those trombones as well. So if you're in the market for those, come on by and speak to Robert or Spencer. All right. That's all the news I got. Should we get to Nick's interview here, Noah?
Let's do it.
All right. Nicholas Daley, originally from St. Paul, Minnesota, is a versatile freelance trombonist based in the LA area. Nick has showcased his skills across a broad spectrum of musical genres, performing with eminent groups such as the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Poncho Sanchez Latin Jazz Band, and the Buddy Rich Band. His talents also extend to playing in recording sessions for video games, television, and film scores. He has performed with groups such as the Broad Stage Celebrity Opera Recitals, MUSE, the Pasadena Master Chorale, among many others. He also contributes to early music groups like Tesserae and the San Diego Bach Collegium. And now, without further ado, here's our interview with Nick Daley. Well, joining us today in the trombone corner is Nick Daley. Nick, how you doing today?
Hey, doing all right today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Excited to chat about the trombone, and also joining us is looking good as always, Noah Gladstone.
Oh, hey, John. How are you today? Looking great yourself.
Oh, man, doing well. So Nick looks good, too. But, can't leave him out.
Nick's always looking good.
Never looked better, yeah.
So let's talk about the trombone. Nick, can you take us into how you got started with the trombone?
Okay. Well, so I got started when I was, I think, 8 or 9. So my uncle played in LA, and then eventually in the what started
Colorado.
Yeah, it was Denver, and then became Colorado Symphony. And I guess for some reason, trombone sounded good to me when he called us up one day and was like, "Hey, does Nick want to play trombone?" And apparently, I thought that sounded cool. After turning down both piano and cello before that, so mistakes were made from an early age.
So it's his fault. I see.
It really is, and I think there's probably some residual guilt there after all those years,
As with all of us, I
for
think.
sending me down that path, unknowingly. But no, I was lucky enough that he sent me like a beginner, like a con director model, I think.
Mm-hmm. Was it his?
Yeah,
early, like his starter.
It was like
too, right?
I don't know if it was his starter, but it was like one of his it was like his last resort horn.
Right.
But yeah, I sent that, and I was lucky enough to have lessons early on, and support a family and all that, which is a rather large advantage when you're starting.
And you were in Minnesota.
Yes, I was in the Twin Cities, and so and there were, at least at that point, I don't know what it's at right now, but there were a couple of good youth orchestra organizations there at that point, and so I started playing in those like in 4th or 5th grade. And
did you have lessons right away, or were you completely self-taught?
No, I had lessons like right away, like from the beginning. And like I said, I started playing youth orchestra in like my 2nd year, and school band and all that too. So yeah.
Who were you studying with at the time?
I started out with some guy at the local music store who was teaching, trumpet and trombone, and that lasted for I don't know, a couple years maybe, until sort of kind of pretty quickly outgrew that. And I think I remember my parents going to some Minnesota orchestra like summer outdoor program, and just walking up to the guy who was acting principal at that point, Dan Cloutier. And he was the acting principal for a number of years there in Minnesota, and they were like, "Hey, can you teach your son?"
Yeah.
And he did. So he was my teacher for a number of years there through middle school. And he was very instrumental in helping me like get better and actually enjoy. Like he really like stoked the enjoyment of playing also, which was huge. And he made me sight read every lesson, so I'm very thankful for that.
That's good. I think that's something that a lot of people don't do for young students, actually, and it's really important.
Yeah, we would read Telemann recorder duets, a new movement every lesson.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he was great. So I studied with him for a number of years, and then he did not win the audition. He got runner-up. Sadly for me, because that meant he needed to leave town to go find another job. But yeah, he was one of my favorite teachers back then, and so I basically just I bounced around after that with Ashworth at the University of Minnesota for a couple years in high school, and then Kari, who was I think still is the 2nd trombone in Minnesota, and then he decided he didn't want to teach lessons at all. So then my last year, I think my senior year, I ended up studying with the bass trombone player in the orchestra. But yeah, I kind of bounced around after in high school there. Yeah.
This was all in Minnesota?
This was all in Twin Cities, yeah, in Minnesota.
Yeah. So, I mean, other than your teachers and your uncle, any other major influences growing up?
I think like most of us young guys at that point, especially at that point, like Christian Lindbergh was just getting, maybe not just, but was a big deal. Especially for someone at my age who was like, nerding out about the instrument. So like I would listen to Christian Lindbergh albums, and like that's what I wanted to try to be able to do. So I would try to play his repertoire and all this like kind of insane stuff that like I couldn't really play, but it always like I was always pushing myself towards that that idea. And so that was definitely formative. And I think like most beginning jazz trombonists, so I took a jazz like combo camp thing when I was early in high school, and with a group that no longer exists, but a Twin Cities jazz group called the Motion Poets, who ran a 2-week summer camp, and they were cool and supportive of kids, and so that sort of stoked the interest in jazz, and so I listened to a lot of like JJ, which like everyone listens to when they're starting out. So those were like, yeah, Christian Lindbergh and JJ at that point. And then obviously, like, I had my teachers that I would hear from the orchestra. But those were sort of the things I was into at that point, before going off to college and sort of like getting the sort of rude awakening of like something a little closer to reality. Anyway.
So, I mean, was it an easy decision to go on in music, in terms of your college degree, or, I mean, did you have other options that you were thinking about?
I definitely had other options I was considering. I was not 100% sold when I originally went to college. So I applied to college as a double major with like a science major as the other major, which in retrospect was very silly and was never going to happen. But I did end up that was my idea, was I was going to get like a dual degree thing, something academic and something music, and ended up coming down to University of Michigan and Oberlin, and that was right when DeSano got the job at Oberlin. I actually auditioned for a guy who was a national. I can't forget his name at that point, who was teaching at Oberlin. And then DeSano got the gig, and so I talked to him over the phone in the spring, when I was deciding, and ended up going with Oberlin, and they also have a very good double degree program, which I, again, thought I was going to do. Like, I thought I was going to go be like a biochem double major, which was like just not realistic. Especially when I was like, wait, all the classes are 8 a.m. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. So I spent a couple years at Oberlin, like still thinking I was going to do double degree in something, like taking a bunch of academic classes, as well as music, and sort of had like a reckoning my second year of like, if I'm going to do music, I can't spend so much time in the library. Basically, it was sort of a choice of, do I spend 3 hours a night like in the library reading for classes, or do I like go spend in the practice room? And it was sort of I had to kind of choose at that point. I sort of realized, and I decided I wanted to give music a fair shot. So I dropped the second major and spent more time in the practice room.
I had to make that decision for the USD bowling team. Like, do I want to pursue bowling, or do I want to be a professional trombonist? True story, by the way. I am a very good bowler, in case people didn't know. I will beat you. I will snake you in bowling.
Oh,
you've seen it, maybe.
I've seen it. Yeah. No, yeah. I am not a good bowler, so that was not a concern.
It's a weird skill to have, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Oberlin athletics were bad enough. I probably could have played on some of the teams, but
well, we'll have to talk about our young softball career too.
Yeah. Well, I will say at Oberlin, the conservatory team of musicians did win the intramural softball league a couple times.
I have seen you hit a softball, and we were all very impressed.
The funny thing was, Oberlin's type of school where, with the con team, the conservatory team, the championship game was between us and all of the football players from the football team, and we beat them. So that says something about the
quality of softball players in the music school at Oberlin.
It was surprisingly high. There were a few guys that definitely played like high school baseball for some reason.
I mean, for all of our listeners, everyone on this podcast actually was on a softball team called the Misfortunes in the Burbank League. When we were
Church
all,
League, I think, wasn't
Burbank
it?
Church League, when we were all very young, and we all were on the same team, including Preston, our engineer, and John and myself and Nick, and we did win, or we got to the finals, right? And we were robbed. We were robbed. Actually,
it was heartbreaking. Yeah,
it was heartbreaking.
Terrible call.
We should have won, but the team was really terrible because it was called the Misfortunes, and then we kind of seeded all of these excellent musician softball doublers. So who knew?
That team was much more successful than the Cal State Northridge indoor soccer league team that I put together. But we'll save that for another podcast. And I do want to mention that we are still very young, Noah. This wasn't that long. Well, that wasn't that long ago when we were on the softball team.
If you say so.
Feels like ages.
So, Nick, I wanted to ask you, because we do have a lot of young listeners. Would you mind getting more into your decision to, dedicate your schooling to music and to the trombone? I mean, was that an easy decision? I mean, what were your considerations?
Well, it was. I mean, God, at that age, you don't know, right? And at least, especially at this point, which was over 20 years ago, right? There weren't a lot of resources, or at least I didn't know about a lot of resources that to access to get some of like the real information about what was going to be in store if I decided to go down this road. Because certainly at that point it was not something that got talked about in college, like by your professors. Like no one was talking about sort of like the real world reality of trying to be a musician. At that point I was on the path to like take auditions and try to win a job,
You were doing like the orchestral route?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
That's
your
what I
uncle,
was. Yeah, just doing excerpts every day. And I pushed to do stuff in the jazz department at Oberlin, which especially at that point was not encouraged by either side. Like nobody wanted me to be doing that, but I wanted to. So I played in the big band. I played in combos. I took lessons. But it was very much like classical teacher, like DeSano didn't really want me doing it. The guys in the jazz department were like, who's this guy? Like, we don't really want him here either. But it was important to me, and I'm glad I did it, because if I hadn't, as it turns out, like coming to LA and doing what I do now, it would have been much harder to do what I do now. But going back to sort of like the decision making process, for me, it was just sort of it was a realization that if I wanted to be a musician, I had to like go 100% for that. Like I had to give everything to have a chance even of being successful. There was no like half-assing it. Like, oh, I can do some academics, I can do some music. Like now, if you want to do music, it's sort of like, I don't know if my teacher ever had like a real conversation about it, but I think I probably saw my peers either like getting better than me or like advancing more through spending more time in the practice room. But it's something sort of clicked for me, and I was like, all right, well, I do want to do this. This is what I want to do more than something academic. And so if I'm going to do that, I need to give it like all of my concentration and time. Beyond that, I didn't know what it was going to be like. So that goes to like what I was saying, like no one sits you down and is like, so if you want to be a musician, these are the things to keep in mind. Like these are the sort of, these are the upsides, but this is what you're going to have to give up in order to do it, And I think that's an important conversation that I hope is happening more now. Just not to discourage people, but just to be like, okay, like this is the reality of it. Know what you're signing up for. It's an amazing thing to do, but it also like it's going to be really hard. And I think that's the part that no one, like, at least in the old days, no one talked about. Like it's going to be hard, and even if you like, do the orchestra thing, like you're going to take 20, 30 auditions until maybe you win something, and that's like jumping ahead a little bit. I got to a point in my mid 20s where I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to just keep taking auditions and like just spend all my money traveling, all my time practicing excerpts. Like that became very not appealing to me at a certain point. And so that was another decision that happened later. But those are just just sort of addressing the realities of what it is to be a musician, I think was not something I had in my mind at the time of making the decision. And it's not that it necessarily would have changed my decision. It's not about saying don't do this. It's just sort of like, it's good to know. It's good to know what you're in for.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's excellent, Nick. I'd love to talk a little bit about your time with DeSano, because I'm always impressed with every DeSano student I ever hear. They always have such great sounds and concepts and musicianship. And I'm just kind of curious what your lessons were like with him. What are kind of some of the nuggets that he instilled in you?
Yeah, DeSano, for being sort of like a crotchety old guy, even at that point, like pretty cranky, like old Italian, like whatever. But like he has a very good heart. Like he really cared, which you can't say about everybody. But in terms of pedagogy, he did actually have like a pretty well developed, like not method, but definitely like in terms of concepts, had a very well defined pedagogy about what he wanted from you and what his sound concept was, and sort of some basic stuff, but it really stuck with me. So like, and one of the things that always stuck with us, he would say, say toe for articulations, toe, 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 like not T, not ta. Like for him, it was all about, like, we talked a lot about shape of embouchure. So the idea of toe was to have a round aperture, right? So that's where your kind of your tone came from. So if you flatten out your embouchure, your tone suffers. So you think toe, round embouchure. And then his other big thing was sort of the foundation, which I talk to my students about, is the foundation is your corners and your chin. So it's like corners down, flat chin, say toe. And that was sort of the physical foundation of producing a sound and having an embouchure that worked. And there wasn't a lot of technical stuff in terms of like, some people get hung up on embouchure placement and up down center. I mean, obviously, like the idea was to center it, but like we never talked about that. So it was like those embouchure fundamentals, and then his sound, which you hear if you listen to recordings he's on, it's all core, and there's very little periphery. So it's not this big, wide, broad sound, which obviously, like many places, is a thing you hear in many orchestras. But his sound, if you listen to those Cleveland recordings, was much more focused and not as broad, but it was incredibly dense. And I could always pick him out. Like if I heard the orchestra, I could pick his sound out from his section mates. But he had this focus to his sound that carried and projected. And so he definitely instilled the idea of like core is the most fundamental part of your sound, and you want a dense, like big core, and the periphery, the breadth of your of sound was never something that was stressed. Some of that was he played a bend like
190 F, right?
Yeah. And it was an incredible bend. Like I played it a couple times in lessons, and it was amazing. And Khan was always trying to make him horns so that he would play a Khan officially, because he was, with them theoretically. And I don't, people sound like what they sound like, right? Like we all know, like equipment's kind of like a rabbit hole you go down, and then you still end up sounding like yourself because you can't, of course, change that. So I'm sure he would have sounded more or less the same on any horn.
Keep telling me that. Yeah.
I'm telling myself that.
Right.
But so I mean, he obviously would have sounded however he sounds on any horn, but the bench thing was definitely a part of it, like that versus some like say a 90s era Edwards or something that was not going to sound the same
for sure. I love that, like that Khan sound, it's that clarity, it's the brilliance, but it's also the darkness. And I think it's kind of a lost art. A lot of people don't play that kind of style trombone anymore. It's not necessarily in favor. Maybe hopefully it'll make a comeback someday, because I am a big Khan fan, as you know.
Yeah,
but like Con fan, I thought you were a con artist.
Exactly, con artist. Exactly. Very good, John.
All right, I'll see myself out, guys.
Very good.
And Preston's going to cut that one, like my jokes from the Third Coast interview episode. There, I put that out there so that people wonder John. What that joke was.
I'm trying to have a serious conversation.
Yeah, not that I'm bitter. Sorry, continue
Nick,
on.
Like when you got to USC, you were playing a con that was modeled after DeSano's band.
It was one of the ones that they made for him that he decided he didn't want to keep.
I love that sound. And before you, Nate Seiler came from Oberlin, and he was playing a bench, and all these Oberlin players were at USC, and it was just great to hear
interesting
that sound, because it's different than the LA sound.
Does LA have a sound? I mean, and that's like a legitimate question, because like it doesn't have like an obviously associated with it sound per se, but I'm sure it does. And you grew up here, so you would know.
I did. I always felt, because the LA Phil guys all played cons. They, Ralph, Byron, Jeff, they all played cons. So that's kind of the sound that I grew up with, just hearing that. And I always felt like the LA sound was like a leaning more commercial. It was like a really clean slide technique. Kind of focus on that, not necessarily like the, giant Chicago symphony sound. And then you have like the Cleveland sound, which is like kind of like LA, but really dark,
exactly.
Kind of emotional, Germanic, timbre. Yeah. So I always thought it worked really well together. It was cool to hear that kind of fit in. I think that's one of the reasons why I always enjoyed playing with you so much.
Thank you.
Is the sounds kind of work together. But
I think, and that's something I think we've sort of lost with the homogenization of trombone tone and sound orchestrally over the last 10, 20 years, maybe further back. But like, with the proliferation of Juilliard students winning all the jobs.
Well, I get it. I mean, it's a very uniform sound, and it's a very big and bold sound. But it's okay to be bright sometimes. Like it's trombone. Like it's cool to sound bright. I embrace that. I think when you stop fighting it, then you actually can get some colors and be darker. I mean, that's at least my approach to it. And I think you're kind of similar to that.
Yeah, no, I just think like traditionally regionally speaking orchestras had different sounds, and
Right.
it's really
Right.
we've lost a lot of that. I don't know.
It's
if
kind of the
in
nature
all
of the
sections,
halls
but
that they play in too. I think
yeah,
those sounds kind of you make it work with what you're
yeah,
playing in, and it kind of works. I think, at least talking to Jay about the Chicago stuff, a lot of that has to do with just the dullness of their hall. And they have to play really clear on their large instruments to make that hall kind of work for the low brass. It's kind of neat to talk to them about that. They spend, obviously you have a lot of time sitting in the back row, so you get to think about all of these things and nuances that nobody actually knows other than you. But and then you get to buy lots of equipment, right? To just search for it. But that takes us back around to it.
Always comes back
really-
to equipment.
oh yeah.
So tell us how you decided to come to USC, since we kind of touched on that.
Oh, yeah.
And we
Well,
were classmates there. So tell
we
us about your
were.
graduate studies there.
Well, it was mostly just Poper, Roy Poper at Oberlin, who was
Poper.
teaching there. He got there during my time there, and obviously he and Terry.
I remember my lessons are not. I can't talk about them, but I would start my lessons in the morning with Terry, and he would be on the phone with Roy, throwing expletives back and forth at each other.
Language that cannot be repeated here.
Exactly.
Probably just shouldn't be repeated in general.
No, but they definitely love each other quite a bit. So
Yeah.
It was always fun to hear Roy.
Yeah, no,
I think they would talk every day.
Yeah, it seemed like it. I mean, every time I would go in, I'm sure he did it also because I went in there. If I went to go talk with Poper, you'd call up Terry.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at going either, New York or LA after 4 years in Ohio, for obvious reasons. And it just kind of, it worked out randomly, in part because I got food poisoning the night before my New York auditions. So I literally was like, all of the horribleness, and did not sleep the night before my Manhattan audition. And they basically said, well, you could come back out a different weekend, but at that point, I couldn't really get away another weekend from school. So I played a lovely audition with zero sleep and no food in my belly because I couldn't keep anything down. And it didn't go as well as it could have. And
Fate.
so
everything happens for a reason.
LA just became kind of the only reason, and then I had to fight with USC about money because everyone does pretty much. But yeah, so I ended up just kind of by default coming out to LA, which was probably the right place for me in the end anyway, in terms of what I do and what my skill set is. So yeah, I ended up at USC with Terry. And he, Terry's good for sort of the musical big picture stuff. And I was, glad to have had a lot of the technical stuff drilled into me by DeSano for 4 years. So that felt like that foundation was in place. And I just kind of worked on musical stuff and big picture stuff with Terry. And but the best part about UC at that point was that it was where you went in LA if you wanted to go to music school. Pretty much there weren't a lot of Colburn didn't exist, and so that's where pretty much where you went. And so I was lucky enough to meet you, Noah, and Rob, Cher, and a bunch of other people who are still colleagues to this day. So the biggest thing I probably got out of USC was meeting all the people I still work with, and got out of there in 2 years. So that was good.
Yeah, we did a lot of good work together there, didn't we? It was good times.
Yeah, no, I didn't. There was not a lot of, again, at that point, trying to cross over into the jazz department. If you were in the classical side, they didn't make it easy. I mean, you could play in a big band, right? So that was always an option, which I didn't choose to do. I did play in a jazz combo, which was cool. It's always fun and that's always good practice. But yeah, that's another aspect of music education that hopefully has changed a little bit, but I don't know how much really is, especially for an LA school. You've got to encourage and make and facilitate people branching out style wise and learning all the different styles of music, because you don't work if you can't do some of everything unless you win a job, right? Unless you win an orchestra job, you do need to play the other styles, and especially if you want to work in LA, you just have to. And that certainly for our generation was not encouraged in school.
No, it was not.
And so hopefully that's changed. I don't know if it has, but like that's, I would say if there are young people listening, don't be afraid to branch out. If that's what you like, if you want to be a musician, your life is going to be easier. You're going to have way more options if you can play jazz. If you go and spend some time working on salsa bands like I did for way
Yeah,
too
you did the
long.
salsa circuit for a
I
long
did.
time.
I was doing 3-4 salsa gigs a week for years. Just to, at that point, just to make ends meet, it was the work that was available. But I learned a lot, like I learned about rhythm and time and groove and in a totally different style. And so it was an education in and of itself. And so, I don't use it a ton, but there are still times when, Latin styles come up or whatever. And, like it's there, it's ingrained in me.
Yeah.
That and, doing the big band rehearsal scene at the Union, for a long time.
Yeah.
Those are the two ways that you sort of built up experience and knowledge in different styles. And then doing wedding bands. So
It's like the trifecta.
it really
Right?
is the trifecta
Salsa.
of like commercial style,
Yeah.
teaching and learning and on the job. Yeah.
Well, and those jobs are stressful, but they are low pressure situations also, because it's kind of background. So you can really, it's a sandbox in a sense.
You can fail and almost no one will notice.
Right. Which I think is good. And you got to kind of throw yourself out there and experiment a bit in a professional situation where it doesn't have repercussions necessarily, like on a studio call where
exactly. It is the way it's supposed to work. I mean, you have to work your way up, and ideally you make your mistakes there, not in the studios.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember my first salsa gig I got called for, last minute sub, like day of, evening of, someone couldn't, I don't know what happened, but it was with Sotomayor, who the longest running, most successful salsa band in LA, really. And I remember I showed up and Eric Jorgensen was the other trombone player.
Oh, wow.
And I had never met him before.
Wow.
And I did not know what I was in store for.
Yeah.
So that was very eye-opening in so many ways that night, between like stepping on holes and learning new rhythms and then being like, what is going on next to me?
Right.
The sound that he can produce is incredible.
It's remarkable.
It's superhuman.
Bottle that. Yeah. Astounding player.
Yeah, no, he does not get the respect that I would wish that he does, because first of all, he is actually a really good musician. Like his ears are incredible, and his groove is incredible when he plays. And it's just but like he's made the choice to like have a certain rough around the edges sound and to play it at a certain volume a lot of the time.
It really is incredible, though.
It really is incredible. Like
it gets the people dancing, let me tell you.
I mean, it's he really does. And he's like the only person I've literally seen steam come out of his bell, like with like no exaggeration. Like I've never seen it like that before. But like, and then you learn not to try to keep up with it. That's the one thing you learn. Like I remember at first I would try to keep up with him volume wise, and then you're dead in like 2 songs. So you learn to like take it back 10% and not kill yourself entirely.
It's the same thing on the trumpet side. The guys that are doing that day in and day out are just monsters. And it's like, you can't compete with it unless you've done that for decades. So while you were at USC, obviously you're talking about the connections you were making, which I think is an amazing point that we don't think about going, as we're choosing schools and what we're doing at school. Oftentimes we think about our implied instructor, who's the trumpet teacher, who's the trombone teacher, but not like what connections am I going to start making? Because I mean, you guys are both perfect examples of how your careers blossomed out of the connections you knew from USC and other places. So take us through that. Other than doing the trifecta of salsa wedding bands and rehearsal bands, like how did you start getting into the freelancing scene?
Oh man, well, I spent most of my 20s a little bit aimlessly. I'll be honest. I was never sure about staying in LA at that point in my life, and I think I know that like that contributed to sort of like, yeah, just kind of coasting and not. I didn't commit to LA in my 20s, and as a result, like I didn't look into what exactly I needed to be doing to be successful here. And so I wasn't as successful as I could have been if I had either. Well, I will say, like, it would have been nice to have a little more guidance in terms of like what's the way to make it in LA. Didn't get a lot of that.
Well, yeah, there's no book written about that.
Yeah, I mean, some people, some teachers, I think are more kind of hooked into like being able to guide you down that path. And I didn't really get that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't seek it out, which is my own fault. So because I was like, well, I don't know, we'll see what happens in LA. Was kind of my attitude. I was young and I was like, just, like living life. So I didn't fully commit to LA, didn't like seek out the sort of like the right people to connect with, I would say, other than like, Noah was starting to do his thing and starting to have some things happening. But like I didn't seek out like the studio guys to go take lessons or like try to cultivate relationships, right? In part because I didn't see that as being like the legitimate way to do it. Like I was like, well, if you're good, people will call you, like in my head, as like a young, dumb 20-something-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
Not thinking about the other side of the sort of the social and the networking side of the business, which is it is really important. And so I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't cultivating that. I was just kind of, wandering, shall we say. And as Noah remembers, I eventually got to a point where I was like, yeah, I don't really like LA. I'm just going to leave. And so I did.
Yeah, we had a long talk about this actually
Yeah.
just before you left. I remember at your place over in Glendale.
Yeah. It was, and it was a long time coming, and there were a lot of reasons why I was unhappy. But it, it was sort of like, it was a necessary part of the journey as we, looking back in retrospect. But I went home to Minnesota for like 6-7 months and was like, checked out the scene there, lived at home, blew through my savings. And I was like, well, all right, there's definitely not a scene in the Twin Cities that like needs another trombone player. Like they had a few and that's all they need. It was not going to happen there. And so I did a cruise ship gig, like you do. They're always there for you in times of need. You can always do a cruise ship. And so I called up Princess and was like, hey, here's my resume. I would like a job. and I had a phone interview and then I had a job. It was the easiest job I've ever gotten in my life.
Yeah.
But that was in part because I'd been working in LA for, 8 years or whatever at that point. So anyway, but I did that to save some money and like figure out my life again. And I got off of that and, and did a lot of thinking and eventually realized that there was nowhere else that made sense or like where I thought I would be better served like going to than coming back to LA. It just made the most sense for like, I'm not going to go to New York and start from scratch there. That's stupid. Like, there's very few places where you can be a freelancer, where you can do a bunch of different things, a bunch of different styles. And that was important to me also. Even like I sort of looked at it like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to commit to wherever I live. I'm going to commit to doing the thing. And when you start looking at where you can actually do that, there's very few places, right? Like it's pretty much LA. I don't know.
I guess how I feel about it.
I mean, there's a few more options like now, and I guess in some other towns.
Nashville's getting some options, I think, and Chicago certainly gives you some options there.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a good scene. But in New York, obviously, there's a lot of the shows and stuff. I mean, you would be well suited in New York, obviously, too. With your
but New York, it's like either you get a show or you're starving. I mean,
it's tough. I think that's another 10-year town, just kind of like LA in a sense. So a lot of people always email and say like, hey, I'm new to town. What do I do to get gigs? It's like, well, you kind of have to wait 10 years and then you get some gigs. That's kind of how it goes. Talk a little bit about the cruise ship, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think, because it is a viable option for a lot of young players and they should consider if
Yeah.
you want to learn that
Yeah,
style and another low pressure,
yes, exactly.
sandbox, that's a good spot.
It is like the alternative version of like doing what I did in LA in my 20s in terms of like playing salsa gigs and then doing casuals and doing big bands. You could do a cruise ship gig, and if you're young and want to get out and travel and just you will play a bunch of different kinds of music. It's not without its trade-offs, but I always thought like if I had been in my early 20s instead of I was like 31, 32 when I did the cruise ship, it would have had a blast. Like I still had fun, but like, I learned that I couldn't keep up with the kids in the canteen. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
You learn
old man Daley's here again.
Yeah, seriously. Like, the weird thing about the cruise ship, like before I get to the musical part of it, was like it's usually either like a lot of younger people in their 20s or it's like the lifers, the career people who are like older, right?
Yeah.
There was almost nobody in that sort of middle ground, like 30-ish age bracket. So I was sort of in this no man's land. So like, sort of socially, it worked out fine because you sort of have built-in like social networks with like the other musicians and then like the dancers and the singers and your sort of entertainment world. And it was totally cool. Like I made friends and like I had a good time. But
you got to see the world too, right? I mean,
I did 5 months, which was I did 5 months, and there were a couple times where I almost just walked off the ship and didn't come back when we were in Fort Lauderdale for a couple months. That just came down to like the MD situation. Like, you're at the mercy of having a good or bad MD. And the first half of the contract, it was a great MD and he was super chill and it was chill. In the second half, the guy was not. And so it was not fun. But I don't know. I mean, what you do shows, you do jazz stuff, you do not a ton of classical stuff, but in terms of commercial styles, you do pretty much play all the commercial styles. And it's not a difficult life. It's a pretty easy life. I mean, it depends on your MD and how much they schedule you and some other aspects to it. But, like it was a low stress, like low responsibility gig. And, but you have time to practice if you want, if you have the self-control, whatever, if you have, the ability to make yourself practice, you have the time for it. And then you have the time to kind of do whatever you want during the day for the most part. So yeah, if as far as like something where you could kind of hone your craft and learn different styles, it's definitely it's very feasible. Like it's not a bad option when you're young and don't have anything to give up. Like you just want to travel and learn and have fun. Yeah, definitely like a viable option. The question you always have to ask yourself is like, if you start doing it, like, you got to have an exit plan because some people kind of get stuck on them because it's easy and it is like, low stress. Like it's a nice little lifestyle. But I would say like if you have grander plans than that, like that kind of have a plan in mind to like, I'm okay, I'll do one contract, do two contracts, whatever. And then like whatever your next step is, like have that in mind so that you're not like, just kind of get stuck in a cycle of like, yeah, I'll just do one more contract.
I have to imagine you have to convince yourself too that you're not on vacation, right?
Oh, but you are though. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. Like
you are, but I mean, if you're using it as kind of a quasi training ground,
oh yeah.
You have to stick to a routine. You can't just be on the Lido deck all the time, And yes. I know the different cruise lines are different in terms of how they treat the musicians, with the kind of freedoms and things.
Yes, but, it does depend on and I don't know a lot because I only did Princess for one contract, and who knows what that's like now versus any other place. But yeah, you are correct. You do probably need to be able to have some dedication to it if you're to your own craft if that's what you're trying to do. But it's like I said, you have so much free time. It's not even like you can do it all if you budget your time correctly. Like you could spend a couple hours in the practice room and then still like.
Still hang out on a Lido deck.
Yes, exactly.
Do the Macarena. So, I mean, when you were off coming back to LA, I mean, was it? Did you just jump right back in, so to speak? I mean, I know you were gone for several months. Was it?
So I was gone for a little over a year.
Okay.
And I mean, this is where like really, if not for Noah on this podcast, like I'm not sure how things would have turned out. Like Noah, like to this day, I'm still eternally grateful for your help when I came back and support.
Thanks, man. Of course.
It would not have.
It was
worked out the
Songfest
same.
that broke you in,
and
right?
he got me on Songfest, and from there, it's really just your career just takes off, as it turns out.
I mean, Secret Taco Bell is all about the Secret Taco Bell.
People listening to this are going to have no idea what we're
No,
talking about.
that's like way,
And that's fine.
way
That's
inside.
okay.
Way
We're just
out.
putting it out there for posterity.
All four of
Rest
us
in-
were on
rest in
Songfest.
peace.
What am I
Rest in
talking
peace,
about?
Songfest.
All four of us were on Songfest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I was able to, Noah was able to help a lot, just by supporting in a lot of ways, and throwing my name back in with people. Cause at that point it was about rebuilding relationships. But I also, when I came back, made the decision to put on a friendlier face. It is still a bit of a joke and a meme at this point, I would say, that I can be grumpy. But I did make a big effort when I came back to curtail that and to smile more, as one might say. No, but to just, to make an effort to reach out to people, to be more social, to have a better attitude when coming to work, because it goes back to sort of in my 20s. I was like, well, like it just matters how you play, like just play well, and that's enough. And the reality is that it's not enough. The reality is there's a ton of people who can do the job, and especially in a town like LA, there's a ton of people who can play as well or better than you. And so not half, but like part of the gig is showing up and making and being someone that people want to be around. And that's not always easy. Like for some people it like comes naturally. Some people have that sort of thing. I had to cultivate it, let's say, like fake it till you make it kind of a thing. And I still now like I have like a 1-year-old now, and so I'm like back to being a little grumpier because of the lack of sleep. I find that I'm gonna have to redouble my efforts at this point in life to
Wait till you have a teenager. My gosh, if they had
come-
only warned me.
Oh, God. Yeah, I know. I get, it's funny. I get the advice. Some people are like, "Oh, it gets easier," and some people are like, "Nah, it doesn't get easier."
No, the problems get bigger. I think changing the diaper is the problem.
Yeah. So, I would say like in terms of coming back to LA, like half of it was like rebuilding relationships, like playing wise, and also rebuilding relationships socially, showing people that like you're someone who they're going to enjoy being around when they come to work, as well as them like playing well. From there, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to like map out how things progress. You just like Noah said, it's a town where you have to wait, and if you try to jump the line, you will get ostracized. I would say. No, I mean, ostracized is a strong word, but like it's frowned upon.
It's you get penalized, I would say, more than ostracized
Yes.
by the community, just because a lot of people have been waiting. So it's like, you show up and you jump over people, and it doesn't do you any favors per se. So
Yeah, and there's
it's a balancing act. You need to take your
yeah.
opportunities when you take them, and then and they present, and then also be mindful of the optics of it. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and there's
with your colleagues.
there were pros and cons to the system that's been in place. That is sort of
It's definitely changing as the work is changing.
Yeah.
At least in the studio scene, and putting my studio owner contractor hat on, it's just it's a changing and challenging time for everybody. I think, especially as we're doing this podcast here in April 2024. Budgets are shrinking.
Mhm.
Projects are few and far between sometimes now. It's not the normal cadence of the last 20 years of the amount of movies that are being made with large budgets, and the diversification of the independent films, and just streaming new media is a changing landscape. So I think the studio world, where a trombone player fits in, is kind of small in the grand scheme of things, but it's tough, but I think you're doing really well with a lot of you're doing a lot of the Broadway shows that are in town now.
Well, I've been lucky to get a couple calls for that, and that's been huge, especially post strike.
Yeah.
We had this sort of delay in our like the effect from the strike on us in the studios. Came a few months later after all the projects that we had finished up, and then all the projects that should have been getting recorded, they never got done. So,
it's interesting. Byron Peebles, my teacher, always told me when I was young and studying with him, he's like, don't neglect the live work. It's like, the studio work is very lucrative and very tempting, but he's like, don't neglect the live work because that's stable and you can build a life and have a family with the live stuff. And it's funny, as we stare down this AI revolution that's coming, I'm thinking about what's that going to look like for musicians? And I think one of the areas that can't be replaced is live performance.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think it's kind of going to have a second resurgence and a blossom, I think, and a lot of people are going to want to go back to concerts. I'm already seeing it, of just people doing live shows, producers creating stuff and experiences. And I think that's a pretty good space to be in right now, personally.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think, we all know the studio scene in LA has been on the decline for 20 years, longer maybe, depending how you look at it. And it's still there. I don't think it's ever going to disappear. I think there's always going to be a need for it. But, like you said, it's changing. It has generally gotten smaller.
The kind of work, I mean, just for people that don't know, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, they would do a movie for a week or two to score a movie. It would be triples or doubles every day with a full orchestra. And now they'll do a full feature in maybe 2 to 3 days, mostly striped out by section. So the calls for brass players in particular, maybe you're doing 1 or 2 singles. If you're lucky, maybe 1 or 2 doubles,
right?
And kind of banging out the whole movie in a section of brass and, jumping around, rather than, 2 weeks of work, you're getting 2 days of work. And that's kind of just the modern production technique. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's, they've figured out how to save money, right? I mean, this is, you can speak to that, but I mean, it's a lot cheaper to pay us for a couple of days than it is to pay us for 2 weeks, while people kind of, I mean, it wasn't always, but you hear stories about people sitting there for a day or two, not ever playing a note, right?
Tommy Johnson in the back cooking hot dogs.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Writing books. The trombone section, those guys wrote
bringing in
doing their taxes. I don't know,
bringing in a TV and a VHS player, right?
Exactly. Famous one. Don't want to know what you boys are looking at back there. But,
I mean, the golden age is when each studio had their own full-time orchestra.
It's way back.
Yeah, it's a lot different. I mean, they would, back way back when they had the contract orchestras, they were doing multiple movies and scores, just like you'd show up and just read stuff down.
Yeah, and then they did record cartoons on their breaks and
jingles. I mean, the whole jingle business too. That was people had full careers just doing jingles.
Yeah.
So
it's definitely it's changed. I mean, you're saying it's hopefully I think the live work. I think your point about live work is important to our future. Yeah.
So for someone who wants to move to LA, Nick, what would your advice be other than just, being able to play all the style? I mean, you have to play at a high level, that's given, but what are the other skills?
Making coffee. I mean, Starbucks is a good option for a lot of players, I mean, if you move to town, like a lot a lot of our colleagues did that.
Have patience.
Yeah.
Patience. Yeah.
Patience.
Well, I think you're talking about
being willing to do the work, that is not necessarily playing when you move here. Yeah, I wouldn't expect to be getting playing work right away. Obviously, you kind of work towards that, but
it's a little
for sure.
It's different for if you come here for school, then you maybe get a little bit of a head start. You get a bit of a runway for taking off. So there's that if you're coming here cold, you're gonna need to have a plan to make some money some other way, probably for a while.
Yeah, a great example
Well,
of
Disney,
that.
and Disney actually
Yeah.
too. I mean, Nick, you played at Disney for a little while.
I did for a few years.
You know,
Yeah, that's
and that's a good viable option for a lot of players,
it's
and they're
definitely a
always
different
hiring.
it's a different gig than it used to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Now there's a lot of there's a lot of running around and dancing and other stuff that didn't used to be that way. But there's a lot. I think there's higher turnover now. So in that sense, like Disney is, if you're willing to do it, I think there's a fairly high rate of need there.
And
for
that's
people.
a union job, and it pays
Yeah.
benefits, and it pays pension, and it's
Disney
not bad.
It's not a bad gig, and I was happy to have it for a number of years there, where I started subbing, and then the most I had was a couple days a week with the now deceased Hook and Ladder Band. Rest in peace. But especially at the time when I was doing it, I was like, yeah, this is like decent money. It's okay, and it's something you can just fit in there, For me, it was a couple days a week, and it helped fill out my weeks a lot of the time.
And the sub work you can also just get on as a sub, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's how I started. I mean, that's how most people.
Yeah.
At least in the old days, you would start. Someone would say, "Hey, we need another sub. So what about this person?" And it would, you'd come in for a day, and like they would watch you trip and flail. And as long as you played most of the right notes and only stepped in the holes you were supposed to step into that were planned for you, then maybe they'd have you back.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little different now, because now you have to now you got to do all the rehearsals
choreography
and choreography and everything. But back in the day, it was like they did not prepare you at all. You would literally come in and sight read all their stuff, and they would leave mistakes in the parts for you to play. So, like I said, when I mean stepping in holes you're supposed to step in, there were certain holes that you were supposed to step in, and that way they knew that you were actually reading it correctly.
Amazing. Well, that's great advice, though, about especially like the economics of it. And I was going to say, like, a great example on the trumpet side of things is John Lewis, who, he's the top call trumpet now in the studios. And when he moved to town, he had a paper route. He's like 4 in the morning.
Mouthpieces for Marcinkiewicz, right?
Well, yeah, but
yeah,
I mean, he talked on the podcast about he'd be buzzing his mouthpiece in one hand and throwing out the newspaper out the door back when people did that, and he did that for years to make ends meet before he started getting enough gigs to then not have to.
Tommy Johnson was a middle school band director.
Yeah,
So.
Don't be too good for anything. I mean, that's some really simple advice, but don't be too good for anything. Also, like, we all started out playing gigs that are like, you would probably categorize as undesirable, and that's
paying
okay.
Your dues,
like
that's what they
that's I mean, that's the old thing was paying your dues, and that's it comes back to sort of like have things shifted at all, to where there's like less dues paying now, and and that does happen sometimes now. There's a little less of a sort of the system is not quite as like airtight as it used to be, for better and worse. Whereas like,
well, I think just a lot of the training jobs, those kind of entry jobs aren't available anymore. It was like a lot of television was a huge place where you kind of have that weekly 3 hours single banging out episodes of TV shows, and 2 takes and you're moving on because you got to get through 30 minutes of music or 40 minutes of music in a session, and you kind of cut your teeth on those. A lot of the younger players, John Lewis, for example, did all that Star Trek stuff. That's kind of his first foray into scoring, and you kind of learn the craft there, and that outlet is not really available anymore.
Well, the amount of work, just the volume of work,
the volume
there,
of it,
and
exactly.
So there isn't enough for it to trickle down necessarily for people to get experience on lower stakes stuff,
right?
Right. So sometimes people get thrown into the deep end without having as much experience, and that's that can be an issue. But you end up, I think now it's probably important to get the experience in other places, because you're not necessarily gonna get those like you're saying, like, oh, there's a TV show that someone who's younger and less experienced can cut their teeth on. Like, that doesn't really exist. There isn't enough work for the trickle down to happen as much as it used to.
I know.
So you got to get your experience other places. So I think it is, like we were talking about, it's like important to just take, you just take whatever gig. I mean, like, I think it's pretty standard. Like, we all just took whatever gig we got offered when we were young, like, you didn't really think about it. And I don't know. I assume that's probably still just the way things are. But you kind of have to, you have to. It's part of it's just getting experience. Part of it's making ends meet. Part of it is just getting yourself out there.
Mhm.
And
making those
meeting
connections.
people, making connections. So don't be too good for anything. It's
Great advice, Nick. And I can't believe it, 29 episodes, and this might be the first time I get to ask this question. But let's get geeky. Let's talk about what equipment you're using.
Oh boy. Well, as Noah well knows, because I've had many horns come through him. So I played that con that came via DeSano for a long time, and that was an FX bell, which was, I can't remember if that was the heating or cryo process. I think it might have been an annealing process.
Process, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a special process. And I still have that bell, but I basically the slide got to the point where it just didn't work well. I don't know why. Con slide stuff, it happens. And I'd taken it to get fixed a million times, and it was just, this action was never going to be good. And so I had it rebuilt, and I didn't like how it played anymore. So I had the slide rebuilt, and I didn't like how it played with the bell. And that really sent me down a whole rabbit hole of trying a ton of different horns, because I was trying to recapture kind of what I've had on that original con that I was playing. That con was from 99, 2000-ish, probably 2000. And so I went through a ton of different horns, and I don't even remember exactly what anyway, a ton of different stuff. I think, what did I have first?
You had a Greenhoe for a while, and then
I had a Greenhoe.
You had a Wrath for a while.
Bach. I had a Wrath.
Well, that no one knows.
For a while.
I know. I had a Courtois, a new Courtois for a little while, which was great. I really liked that horn, but it was with the cut bell and the way the balance was in that horn. It was so bell heavy, and the ergonomics of holding it, I don't know who it was made for. Made for a child's hand or something. I could not get that horn to not give me cramps in my palm in my hand. I just couldn't do it. I could not play that horn for long enough to make it work. So the Courtois went, and for the last, I don't know, a couple of years now.
Yeah,
2-3 years now. I've been on the Getzen Bousfield. I don't even know how you're supposed to say his name.
Bousfield. Yeah.
Bousfield. The 4047 IB, right?
Yeah.
Great. And
which is kind of like a con style,
right? It has some connishness to it, because he played. Was he a con player originally?
He was
and then
player,
Yamaha,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's definitely, I would say, more modeled on a con than a Bach, if we're going to go between those two camps. But it's very much a modern horn that it's very dark, for better and worse. But it's it's kind of a beefed up con-ish style thing in a lot of ways. And we're pretty happy with it. So I've got that. I've been through a million mouthpieces. I played Doug Elliott for years, but eventually realized that I needed more help on my low range. And the Doug Elliott pieces weren't doing that for me at that point. So I've been through a million mouthpieces, but now I'm on the original Toby Oft model, signature model from Grego, which I don't even know if he makes anymore. Maybe you can special order it. One of those random things, you buy a ton of used mouthpieces over the years and just try stuff. And that was one of those ones where I tried, and I've been back and forth on it. And then now I've stuck with it for long enough now. I think it's going to be the long-term piece, but yeah, it's like a 3 ram 4 funnel shaped 4 cup, I think, ish kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of like a flatter rim funnel shaped kind of guy. So there you go. But that's my big horn. I have a K&H Bart Van Leer model for commercial. I have what is it?
Your bass trombone.
Edwards 502 dependent for bass. I somehow ended up with 2 horns with the harmonic pillar systems, which is kind of ironic because I thought it was BS, but it actually makes a difference. So there you go. For all the nerds out there, I thought it was BS, but not that it makes it better or worse, but it does change the horn. Legitimately, I was kind of shocked.
The feel changes.
Yeah, the feel changes. The response changes. It's I think what it is that it changes how the horn responds to you, and like kind of like how kind of loose or tight it plays. Yeah, that was like the big difference I noticed. Like you dialed in your sort of your
it's pretty clever.
Your resonance of for the horn. But yeah, so those are the three main horns. I've got a 4B Silver Sonic for some show use, because shows are kind of their own thing in terms of style, where you've got like, especially the way they write shows now, you've got bass trombone and tenor trombone on the same page, and sometimes they give you time to change and sometimes they don't.
Right.
And so sometimes you're like playing the bottom of the tenor range, bottom of the staff, like where you really need the trigger, but then 10 bars later you're going to be playing like a commercial, like a big band type lead cue, and so it's like, well, what the hell do I play for this? And so I've got a 4B for some of that. I think I would also like a 3B for some of that. But there's those kind of gigs are tough, because there isn't the perfect horn, because it's a compromise. You're just kind of choosing what's the lesser of your evils.
Indeed. Cool. Before we wrap up here, I just have a quick question. Who is your favorite trombone player to listen to?
Oh dear.
Could be living or not.
Oh, that is a good question. See, the irony of this is that, like, I don't listen to trombone much anymore.
Okay.
No,
that's a valid answer.
Let me think about it though. No, I mean, because I try to think about like who I like listening, like who do I enjoy listening to. It's a good question. And I think, see, what this is illustrating for me is that, like, you get so lost in working and working on your own stuff, and then also just getting lost in like sort of the like just day-to-day work, right? Like, well, I gotta do this day, and like, especially if you're like, I do a bunch of different stuff, right? So different style every week, like it's opera, and then it's whatever, and it's a show, and then it's big band, and it's that you're just, for me, I'm like constantly jumping from one thing to another, and so it's like, all right, let me just shift modes and like try to practice the right horn the day before, that like pleasure listening is a bit of a luxury. Who do I like listening to? That is a good question.
We can save it for the follow-up.
You've stumped me.
I stumped you.
I have to think about this. Yeah, I may have to think about this. Well, actually, no. You know what? If I want to go like listen to some trombone and put a smile on my face, I will probably go listen to John Allred. So that's like kind of a left field thing, but like someone who, from a jazz standpoint, I just really enjoy his playing. So
absolutely,
that'll put a smile on my face. I think that's the important criteria at this point, because you can get real jaded and lose the joy in music when you do it for a career and for a profession. I think that's one of the things we all kind of have to fight when you make a business out of your passion. So it's a good point to bring up. Like, what do I like to listen to? Well, that puts a smile on my face. So I think that's the way to go.
Great answer. And thank you for putting a smile on all of our faces.
Oh,
warm and fuzzy day in the trombone corner.
I would be blushing, if you could see me.
If we could see you. Nick, how can folks find you? What's the best way to learn what's going on? Social media, website?
I do
or
not
are you like under the...
I'm pretty under the radar. Like, it kind of goes back to our discussion earlier about like how much self-promotion is considered the right amount. And I just don't really do it. I don't have a website. I do theoretically have an Instagram that I never use. But I think I get tagged on Instagram. So that's probably like, the closest thing. Like, I think I get tagged occasionally, for different things. But, that's like the tricky thing about LA. It's like, how much self-promotion do you do? And what's the right kind? And like, that's a whole nother discussion, but
it's a whole nother, we'll write a book on that. Okay.
You can find me out and about, or, it's, talk to Noah, Noah's my agent.
Noah
I'm booking Nick for
exactly.
weddings and quinceañeras.
Yes. Bar mitzvahs, anything, really.
Bar mitzvahs,
salsa gigs. Yeah.
Well, equestrian events.
Absolute pleasure having you on, Nick. We'd be remiss not asking you the final question. So if you go, and this might be easier than your favorite trombonist to listen to, but if you could leave our listeners with your best piece of advice, what would that be?
Best piece of advice. Yeah, if you love it, do it, because there's nothing else that is like doing this. That's like the big advice, and then you're gonna sound like yourself no matter what. So lean into it. Like,
I think that's good advice.
don't like
That's it. Yeah.
don't just equipment, everything else. Like you're gonna have your own thing, and I think it's you want to hold on to that, because whatever your thing is what's gonna either like make you successful or not. So embrace it.
Wonderful. Well, Nick, it's
Thank
been
you,
an
Nick.
absolute honor. Thank you so much for spending your
Thanks
morning
for having
with
me,
us.
guys. That was a fun little talk.
Well, that was a great interview with Nick. I'm so thrilled that he could be on today, and just love listening to him and his story. Obviously, I've known him for a long, long time now, and he's a dear friend, and really great to have him on today.
Yeah, it was a real honor. I mean, we had mentioned the Song Fest, and so for those of you who want the inside scoop on the inside joke, we all performed in the pit for basically as a talent show kind of thing at Pepperdine University. It was a ton of fun. We used to do every year, and all of us were in the pit together playing pop tunes and whatnot. So
Along with Howie,
dear old Howie Shear,
recently.
But it was a fun gig, and one of the few times I got to get out of the shop and get to play. So
We actually had Robert Coomer on that gig too, right? So
yeah, man, it was like a family
affair.
down there. So,
Exactly.
so that was the inside joke. But yeah, Nick's, really making a name here in LA. And as you can hear from the interview, you know why. He's connecting all the dots, not just being a fabulous player, but, has his head screwed on straight. And one of the things I really appreciated him about what he talked about was his honesty about when he came back from this cruise ship and, getting back into LA, his mindset and being positive on the gigs. Cause I think we've said it a lot with other guests, but I think it bears repeating, it's not just playing the instrument, people want to sit in a section with other players that they get along with,
It's not. I mean, I remember Grumpy Nick back in the day, and it's really great to see him kind of grow as a person. He recently had has a young daughter, got married, and it's just really nice to see him grow and mature into the wonderful human and player that he is now. It's really terrific. So
yeah,
bravo,
brought
Nick.
a smile
We're
to
all
of
really
our
proud of you.
faces. Yeah. So Noah, great seeing you.
Always a pleasure. Looking forward to the next guest.
Yeah, look, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review. Constructive criticism can be sent to noah@thebrassarc.com. I haven't done that joke in a few episodes. And until next time, keep on sliding.